Never give up, and good luck will find you. The Never-Ending Story wasn't just a fantasy adventure for children. It was a brutal, chaotic, and sometimes heartbreaking production that pushed its cast and crew to their limits. Beneath the magic of flying dragons and endless imagination lay a set plagued by danger, cruelty, and shocking studio politics. Today we're pulling back the curtain on 20 weird and dark secrets about the Never-Ending Story. And stick around until the bonus fact, because it involves a behind-the-scenes tragedy so shocking it nearly derailed the entire film. Let's dive into the secrets they never wanted you to know. Noah Hathaway nearly died. Filming The Swamp of Sadness. The Swamp of Sadness scene is unforgettable, but behind the cameras, it turned deadly. Noah Hathaway, playing Atreyu, was strapped to a horse and lowered into a massive hydraulic pit filled with murky water and muck. When the platform malfunctioned, Hathaway was dragged under. The crew had to dive in to save him before he drowned. Hathaway later admitted, "I was under for a long time. Too long." It wasn't fantasy. It was a brush with death. The studio downplayed the accident, but Hathaway himself carried the scars, physical and emotional, for years. What audiences saw as cinematic heartbreak was actually a moment that nearly cost a child actor his life. Artax the horse nearly didn't survive filming. In the same swamp sequence, the horse Artax wasn't acting, he was sinking. To capture the heartbreaking realism, handlers trained the horse to stand still as it was submerged into a platform of quicksand-like mud. But the shoot lasted far longer than expected, and the animal reportedly struggled, panicking under the weight of the set. Hathaway revealed he screamed not just for Atreyu, but for the horse itself. Animal welfare standards were far looser in the early 80s, and the production cut corners to get the shot. While the horse ultimately survived, the ethical cloud around this scene still lingers. Viewers cried for Atreyu losing his horse. Few knew the horse was almost truly lost. Director Wolfgang Petersen bullied his young cast. Wolfgang Petersen, fresh off his success with Das Boot, brought military precision and cruelty to his child actors. Noah Hathaway and Barrett Oliver, Bastian, both described the shoot as emotionally punishing. Petersen reportedly berated Hathaway during takes, demanding more raw emotion, sometimes reducing him to tears. Barrett Oliver later said he often felt isolated and pressured, forced to carry emotional weight far beyond his years. It wasn't gentle guidance, it was domination. Petersen pushed his child actors like hardened professionals, ignoring their youth. The result? Brilliant, haunting performances, but at the cost of trauma that stuck with them long after filming ended. Limahl's theme song became a battleground. Everyone knows Limahl's iconic synth-heavy theme song, The Never-Ending Story. But Petersen hated it. He wanted a classical score, something timeless. The producers, however, saw dollar signs in the growing MTV market and insisted on a pop anthem. Tensions erupted between Petersen and the studio, with Petersen refusing to include the song in the German release. That's right. German audiences never even heard the track during the original run. Not unity, but fracture. The very song that became a global earworm was born out of creative warfare. Ironically, today, most people remember the song before they recall the film's plot, a victory for the producers and a bitter loss for Petersen. The childlike Empress suffered on set. Tammy Stronach, who played the childlike Empress, was just 11 years old when she filmed her iconic role. Behind the regal costumes and glowing makeup, she was treated more like a prop than an actress. The heavy lighting rigs burned her skin, and she spent hours under hot spotlights to achieve that ethereal glow. Worse, her parents shielded her from the film's darker side, but not from the exploitative offers that poured in afterward. Creepy proposals for modeling shoots and suggestive projects. The role that should have launched her into stardom instead scared her away from Hollywood. Stronach never acted in another film. What audiences saw as a mystical queen was, in truth, a little girl enduring the pressures of a ruthless industry. The Gmork puppet nearly crushed its operator. The terrifying wolf-like Gmork wasn't CGI, it was a massive animatronic puppet. But operating it was no fairy tale. The contraption was unstable, heavy, and prone to sudden mechanical jerks. Inside, puppeteers were crammed into sweltering, oxygen-deprived spaces surrounded by hydraulics that could snap shut with bone-breaking force. One operator recalled almost being pinned when the jaws malfunctioned. What audiences saw as a smooth predator in the shadows was, in reality, a dangerous machine that could have crushed the crew inside it. The fear on Atreyu's face during those scenes wasn't entirely acting. It mirrored the tension surrounding the unpredictable beast looming just a few feet away. Barrett Oliver's isolation. As Bastien, Barrett Oliver filmed most of his scenes alone, surrounded not by co-stars but by books, set pieces, and invisible expectations. Peterson reportedly kept him separated to maintain the boy's sense of loneliness, but this method left Oliver with little support. The young actor later admitted he often felt cut off from the rest of the cast, especially during emotionally intense sequences. Not guidance, but abandonment. The emotional weight was dumped onto a child forced to carry the film's emotional core in isolation. Ironically, his detached performance became iconic. But the loneliness on screen reflected a deeper, more painful truth. Oliver really was alone. The Luck Dragon almost bankrupted the production Falkor, the beloved flying dragon was a marvel of puppetry, constructed with a 43-foot-long body covered in pink and white scales and a head full of motors. But building it nearly collapsed the budget. Multiple operators were required to control his eyes, ears, and tail, and each take cost hours of resetting. The dragon often broke down, leaving the crew scrambling. What audiences saw as effortless wonder was actually a logistical nightmare. Falkor was so expensive to maintain that Peterson had to cut or scale down other sequences to keep the dragon flying. Falkor didn't just carry Atreyu, he carried the financial weight of the entire film. Child actors faced dangerous stunts with no doubles. Unlike modern productions, child actors in The Never-Ending Story had almost no stunt doubles. Noah Hathaway performed horseback chases, swamp struggles, and wire rigs himself. Safety measures were minimal. During one riding scene, Hathaway was thrown off the horse and broke several ribs. Instead of halting production, the crew wrapped his torso, gave him painkillers, and sent him back to work. Not protection, but exploitation. The production demanded realism at the expense of safety. For audiences, it was thrilling fantasy. For Hathaway, it was agony. The boy who played the hero endured the kind of injuries usually reserved for hardened stunt performers. The set was a toxic environment, literally. The Fantasia sets were built in Bavaria studios, and much of the scenery was constructed from industrial materials not intended for prolonged exposure. The swamp scenes were filled with chemical muck that irritated skin and burned eyes. Crew members complained of constant headaches and nausea. For child actors, the risk was even worse. They often spent hours submerged in sludge or surrounded by noxious paints. What audiences saw as magical landscapes were, in truth, toxic traps. The vivid world of imagination came at a physical cost. Some crew later admitted they couldn't stand to watch the finished movie without remembering the sickness the sets caused. And before we move on, go ahead and like and subscribe, because what's coming in the next 10 secrets will make you see the never-ending story in a way you've never imagined. The nightmarish experience of the Rockbiter suit. The beloved Rockbiter looked whimsical on screen, but for the performer inside, it was torture. The massive rubber and foam suit weighed several hundred pounds and had almost no ventilation. Inside, temperatures soared, and the actor could barely breathe. Each take required multiple crew members to prop him up or peel him out before he fainted. The mechanical hands, designed to lift boulders, often malfunctioned and pinched the operator's skin. What audiences saw as a gentle giant was, in fact, a suffocating prison. The actor inside endured heat exhaustion and near collapses just to bring a single line of dialogue to life. The magic of Rockbiter's kindness hid a cruel reality. Inside the suit, the performer was barely surviving. Jonathan Brandis's uncredited involvement. Before his fame in Sequest, DSV, and It, Jonathan Brandis appeared briefly as a body double for Barrett Oliver during reshoots. His role wasn't credited, and he was paid little. Brandis later spoke about how exploitative the experience was, claiming he spent hours under hot studio lights for shots audiences would never know were his. Not recognition, but erasure. Hollywood often hides its invisible players, and the never-ending story was no different. The irony? For die-hard fans, the story was never-ending, but for Brandis, the experience ended with silence, leaving him a ghost in the film's history. The creepy aftermath for Tommy Stronach. After the film's release, Tommy Stronach received letters, not from fans her age, but from adult men sending suggestive messages. Her parents were horrified, and Hollywood executives didn't make it easier. Producers pitched her inappropriate roles, trying to capitalize on her sudden fame. Her family pulled her away from acting entirely to protect her. What audiences saw as innocence became a magnet for exploitation. Stronach's ethereal beauty, celebrated on screen, marked her for an industry that preyed on child actors. The childlike empress didn't just vanish into fantasy, she disappeared from Hollywood to survive. Wolfgang Petersen's perfectionism caused meltdowns. Petersen was notorious for reshooting scenes dozens of times, chasing a perfection no one else could see. Crew members recalled days stretching into nights as he demanded minor adjustments. Noah Hathaway said he was forced to redo emotionally draining scenes until he collapsed in exhaustion. Tensions boiled over, with shouting matches between Petersen and his staff becoming common. Not efficiency, but obsession. The dream of Fantasia was forged in real-world chaos, with tempers exploding behind the enchanted sets. The haunting beauty of the film is undeniable, but its price was exhaustion, anger, and endless takes that nearly drove the cast insane. The US and German versions were completely different. Most fans don't realize they didn't even watch the same movie. The US version of the never-ending story was cut down by nearly 7 minutes compared to the German release. Petersen himself hated the American edits, especially the inclusion of Lee Mahal's pop song. He even disowned the version that hit international markets. What audiences saw as a unified fantasy was actually a fractured product of cultural clash. In Germany, the film was somber, slower, and more dramatic. In the US, it was faster, flashier, and shaped to sell tickets. 2 films, 1 title, and a legacy split forever. Noah Hathaway's lawsuit against the producers. Years after filming, Noah Hathaway revealed he never received full payment for his work. He eventually sued the producers, claiming he was owed residuals and bonuses promised in his contract. The battle dragged on, adding financial strain to the emotional scars from the shoot. Hathaway said, "I risked my life for that film. The least they could do was pay me fairly." Not just danger, but betrayal. The studio cashed in on the global success, while the young star who carried the story had to fight for scraps. The fantasy of heroism collapsed into the ugly reality of Hollywood contracts and exploitation. The mechanical Falkor. Nearly electrocuted crew Falkor's massive animatronic was covered in fur, but beneath it lay a tangle of wires, motors, and hydraulics. During one rainy shoot, water leaked into the machinery. Crew members reported sparks flying and a near electrocution of the operators working inside. The dragon that symbolized hope and friendship almost became a death trap. What audiences saw as magic in the skies was, in reality, a dangerous hulk of machinery that could short-circuit at any moment. Falkor might have saved Atreyu on screen, but off-screen, he almost endangered the very people keeping him alive. The child actors were denied counseling. The emotional strain of filming wasn't supported by any psychological care. Scenes like Artax sinking into the swamp or Atreyu's battles with Gimork were traumatizing for the young cast. Noah Hathaway later admitted he had nightmares for years, while Tammy Stronach described confusion over why the set felt so stressful. In today's industry, child actors often have on-set tutors and counselors. In 1984, they had none. Not guidance, but neglect. The young stars were left to process pain alone, even as adults demanded bigger performances. The never-ending story may have looked enchanting, but it left its child stars scarred in ways no audience could see. The sequels were a disaster. Despite the original's cultural impact, the sequels were plagued with disasters. Peterson refused to return, Noah Hathaway dropped out, and Barrett Oliver turned his back on Hollywood. Without its core cast and director, the franchise spiraled. The Never-Ending Story 2 was derided as cheap, uninspired, and emotionally hollow. Part 3 was even worse, becoming an infamous flop. Not continuation, but collapse. The magic of the first film couldn't be replicated because the pain and sacrifice behind it couldn't be duplicated either. What audiences thought was a saga turned into a cautionary tale about squeezing life out of a single success. A film that outshone its author's approval. Michael Ende, the author of the original novel, despised the adaptation. He called it a gigantic melodrama of kitsch, commerce, plush, and plastic. Ende was so furious at the changes that he sued to have his name removed from the credits. He lost. For him, the film wasn't a tribute. It was a betrayal. Not harmony, but war. The very man who imagined Fantasia wanted no part of the version the world fell in love with. What audiences embraced as wonder, Ende dismissed as exploitation, leaving the film's legacy haunted by its creator's disdain. Bonus fact, the original set was left to rot. After production wrapped, many of the massive sets, Falkor's Head, the Ivory Tower, even parts of the swamp, were abandoned at Bavaria Studios in Munich. For years they sat decaying, covered in dust and mold. Fans who later visited described the dragon's once sparkling scales peeling away, his eyes lifeless. What audiences remember as eternal magic was left to rot in silence. The never-ending story lived forever on screen, but in reality, its world crumbled into ruins, as forgotten as the luckless characters swallowed by the nothing. The never-ending story wasn't just a children's fantasy, it was a battlefield of danger, exploitation, and heartbreak. For every soaring moment of magic on screen, there was a shadow of real suffering behind it. And yet, the film endures, an eternal paradox of beauty and pain. If you learned something new today, hit like, subscribe, and share your favorite memory of this haunting classic in the comments, because just like the story, the revelations never truly end.